What's up, all you vagabonds? Welcome to The Strange Road, Episode 2. We have a pretty awesome show here for you guys today. We've got my good buddy, Bryce Acer, here with us, and we're going to cover a lot of different things. We're going to get into our money system here in the U.S. We're going to talk about the CARES Act here with the COVID-19 relief packages and how that's affecting people and some of the finer print within the CARES Act, and also surveillance grids, some things that are kind of popping up with our civil liberties here in the U.S. and all over the world, in fact, and how that's, a potential to affect our way of life. And so some things to keep an eye on and a whole bunch more stuff. So it's going to be a great show. Like I said, our hitchhiker today is Bryce Acer. And Bryce, how you doing, buddy?
Doing well.
This is awesome,
Doing
man.
well.
We've been talking about
Glad
doing
to
this
be
for a
here.
long time. Great.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe 10 years.
Yeah, this is awesome, man. Let's get into it, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're into a lot of different things. You have had a pretty amazing career as a computer scientist, and you have a wide variety of interests. And just let our viewers know a little bit about yourself, buddy.
Yeah, my bio-roo.
Yeah, man.
So I got a new title as of last year, which is fun. CEO. So me and two partners founded a company last year, Arbory Digital, and really just doing the same thing we've been doing, but on our own now, which is daunting but exciting. Been a challenge, but it's been a lot of fun, and we're really happy we did it. Sort of went out on our own. So like you said, computer scientist, University of Dayton grad. I've sort of focused in the web content management space for the past 15 years and been really instrumental in helping a lot of the largest Fortune 100 companies websites over that, whether it's some of the financial companies, Ernst & Young, Credit Suisse, as the World Bank, as well as Ford, GM, Automotive, Pfizer, and actually I'm right now helping run Discover.com. So that's more professional side, but I don't usually like to mix professional and pleasure. I'm a big sports fan. We love to travel, love live music. So I've been to actually the 49 and 50 states, got Alaska to go. And at this point, I always want to say 6 continents, but I guess technically 5 continents and a microcontinent. We went to New Zealand back in 2018, and I was digging into that because I know Australia and Antarctica I've never been to, but technically New Zealand's its own microcontinent, I guess.
Absolutely.
Zealandia.
Yeah. Nice, man.
Yeah. So, but I also on the side, as you know, we like to geek out and talk about finance and the goings on of the world and what they're doing politically wise, as well as what the governments are doing, how they're encroaching on our lives, and digging into that. Being mostly my career, I've done the travel work as well as work remote a lot, so that lets me sort of keep an eye on what's going on during the day. Most people don't, they have jobs to go to and they're busy during the day, so they can't really keep an eye on what's going on in the world of politics and finance. And those two worlds blend together a lot of times, which is interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh yeah, for sure. On top of that, I'm a member of Mensa, and I'm also a libertarian, and I'm currently the chair of the Cape Fear Libertarian Party, which is a tri-county group down here in the Wilmington, North Carolina area.
Dude, that's great. Yeah, I mean, we met in 2008, I believe, and it's your wife. I ran into her in Columbus, and she approached me outside of a bar and said, "Hey, I got a question for you. Can my new boyfriend go to Bonnaroo with you?" And I looked at her, with the old cockeye, and she said, "I promise he's cool." And I'm like, well, I don't know. I've never met this guy. Let's hang out. And so we ended up hanging out and with me and another one of my buddies, and we hit it off. And you went to that '08 Rue with us, and we been really, really good friends, close friends since then. So I know a lot of these conversations kind of started during that time when we were at Rue together. And your wife, I grew up with in the same small town as her. She actually lives 5 houses down from, where I grew up. And so, yeah, man, we've been talking about doing this for a long time. It's so exciting that we're here, we're doing this, and yeah, let's get into it. So
I was gonna say 5 houses down is the other side of town too, right?
right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's unless you go over the small highway there, and then you're really on the other side of town. But no stoplights. So one thing I really wanted to kind of just lay a foundation for for this conversation. I know for me, I really didn't know until I met you, and you kind of started breaking it down for me in terms that I could understand as kind of a layman, somebody that didn't understand the economy and money and how money is created, the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, and how all these different institutions sort of create our financial system. And so I figured we could start there, which I think can lay a foundation for some of the things that we're seeing with the banks and big corporations and, money that's being given through the CARES Act. And so I think we could start there. And if you could do your best to tell us, where does money come from?
Oh man, where does it come from? That's a good question. Depends on what your definition of money is. Currently, most currencies in the world are all fiat currencies, meaning that they get their power essentially from government dictate. So governments have told us that this is currency and that you must accept it in payment for goods. And as a lot of people know, currently the Federal Reserve is who prints our money. So if you look at every dollar bill, it'll say Federal Reserve note across the top. At some point we can go into a lot deeper on that and the whole history of just even like the currency of the United States and how it sort of gets its name, the greenback, which was actually coming out of the Civil War, where they printed them in green ink. But long story short, our current monetary system is a debt-based system, and like I said, it's also fiat, meaning really nothing backs it except for the will of the government, and really a government's ability to tax its people. So that's always the implicit guarantee behind pretty much every world currency right now, is that the government has reserved the right to tax the citizens and essentially make up whatever that future IOU payment is for. And really, we were on a gold standard historically in this country, and we left that in 1971. So Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. And that's probably, again, we'll have to maybe do an in-depth one on that sometime. But long story short, we had a gold-based system, and France asked for their gold, and we didn't really have it, or we didn't want to give it up, essentially. So Nixon took us off the gold standard, and since that point, there's really nothing that backs our currency other than the blood, sweat, and tears of the U.S. taxpayer.
Absolutely. And how did you get into kind of keeping your eye on these things? Was it something you've always been, where do you get a lot of this information? Where do you get a lot of your information? Because I think it's important that if people want to do their own research, it's, you can watch this and take it for face value, but you could also do your own research and base an opinion off of, your own research. And
sure.
So
it's so I guess I'm computer scientist. I've always been into math, and I've always been curious really about stocks and how markets work. I mean, I remember we did a market simulation in middle school, and I just sort of found that interesting. And then we did another one again in high school, and I actually won it in my class. I don't remember if it was just the classroom or if it was my wider grade, but sadly, I didn't actually buy this in real life, but it was a company called Fuel Cell, and they were investigating fuel cell battery technologies. And during the course of this stock market simulation, I bought it at $2 and sold it at 110, and that was I don't know if it was the time frame, but it was maybe a month or maybe 3 months, something like that. But obviously, it was at the right point in time, and I had just been happening to research it and look into it. And interesting, if you go back and look at it too, that was definitely like a bubble, late 90s, when we're going through a lot of those. Really, again, I feel like central bank, Federal Reserve bubbles that they sort of blow throughout the periods, but that was really the height of the dot-com bubble. And what's interesting about that technology too is I believe it was ExxonMobil ended up buying that company, but ExxonMobil and a couple of the other oil companies bought a lot of that fuel cell technology and just sort of sat on it because they have other means of selling us energy. So, but that obviously having success at that, it made it interesting. Actually, my first dip into the stock market, I bought 3DFX, I believe the company's name was, but they were a competitor with NVIDIA back in the day. And you might not remember them because they went bust. NVIDIA beat them in a big chip war. And so I believe my grandmother had given me like $500 or something as some type of payment one time. She told us to invest that she had some money and gave me and my two brothers $500. And I bought 3DFX stock, and it went to zero.
Wow.
I learned that lesson.
You got a really early lesson. That's great. Thanks, Grandma.
Yeah.
Life lessons.
Yeah. Luckily, it was only $500.
Right.
But that was getting to see both the boom and the bust.
Mm-hmm.
And we were both the same class, so our high school was 97 to 2001, and that was definitely that .com. I'm guessing that Fuel Cell was maybe 99, 2000, and 3FX might have been 2000, 2001, right when a lot of companies were starting to create the whole pets.com thing and whatnot. So got to see both sides of that coin, and sort of got interested in that. And then I'd say honestly, I got more interested in really when I found out how powerful money is, and really through this crisis, it's been even more evident to me that I've said for a long time, everyone thinks there's unifications of people, there's race, there's religion, there's nationality, but personally I feel like the number one unifying thing globally between most human beings is the Federal Reserve note, the US dollar, because we think in those terms. Our labor's in those terms. When you go, you can negotiate a salary or your minimum wage or your hourly or your whatever. Your pension's measured in dollars. Our stocks are measured in dollars. How much a dollar can buy in eggs and bread. We think in those terms. How much is a gallon of gas in dollars, and by proxy, because we're on a fiat-based system at this point, most other currencies in the world are tied to the US dollar. Mm-hmm. So they might think in Thai baht terms or Japanese yen terms or mm-hmm. Chinese yuan terms. But really, when you look at what's going on behind the scenes, it's really all in dollar terms. And all of their governments, and so they don't have to think about it at an individual level, but we are all using that same metric essentially. And their governments definitely have to worry about that. And we'll maybe get to that in a second, but
because it's the world reserve currency, because it's the petrodollar, it's the world reserve currency. I mean, is that why everyone else's currencies are in a way tied to our dollar, is through it being the petrodollar? And can you explain that a little bit? I don't know if we're getting too off track, but
so the interesting thing is, everyone is concerned about the stock market. The stock market's really small compared to the larger market. The largest market is the FX market, so the foreign exchange market, and that is really the currency pairs themselves. So, the dollar versus the euro, or the dollar yen, or, the Swiss franc and where that's at. And to your point, now that we went away from a gold-backed dollar and it's sort of a floating exchange, well, there has been this implicit backing to the dollar, and that is oil. And really what Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski and a couple others basically sort of brokered some of those deals with Saudi Arabia, who's been our partner for a long time at this point. We have a deal with them that they will only trade oil in dollars globally.
Right.
And so all other countries have to somehow get dollars. Now, if you remember, we can print dollars. They cannot. So they are very much concerned about the stability of their currencies, because that is the stability of their ability to buy oil and energy. And as we all know, oil is what fuels the global economy right now. Now, obviously, that's shifting with technology changes, but by and large, right now, oil is what drives the global economy. Whether it's your cars, whether it's factories, whether it's the electricity that's coming through your house, whether it's the farmers themselves, in the food production supply, that cost of energy. So oil, natural gas is really a major factor into that, and natural gas for heating people's homes in the winter. We used to do a lot of coal, we used to do a lot of other energy, but right now it's mostly oil. And so everyone has to keep their currency relatively strong, because they know that they're going to need dollars and to purchase this on the global market. And so that sort of dovetails a little bit into what now I'm starting to actually read and understand about, which is the euro dollar. And that's really more of a wonky term, but essentially it just really means dollars that are not within the United States, but dollars globally that are traded. Because all of these other countries keep dollars in their central banks and keep United States treasuries in their central banks, and then give their citizens their local currencies. But at the end of the day, for global trade, they're swapping that out for dollars.
Interesting. So on our side, in the U.S., the process of how a dollar is created and how the Treasury and the Federal Reserve and all these institutions, how they all sort of work together to get that final dollar hot off the printing press.
Yeah. It's so like I said, so it's a debt-based system, right? So, and the interesting thing is that this is all starting to change right before our eyes. With the Fed, really over the past 10 years since the global financial crisis, doing their quantitative easing or quantitative tightening, they do a lot of exchange rate manipulation, essentially, to get that into the to sort of affect the economy. And really what that is the cost of borrowing money. And so when I say it's a debt-based system, all of our dollars theoretically net out to zero. So the dollar liabilities and the dollar assets. So every dollar that's created was created out of debt. Someone took a loan out, or a mortgage of a house, or really what the United States Treasury does is they sell Treasury bonds, and they also the Federal Reserve gets those, and the Federal Reserve sort of they give a check to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve prints cash and gives it to the government to sort of disseminate out. So there's a lot of different avenues, though, because all banks themselves actually print money. A lot of people think that it's just the Federal Reserve or just the Treasury that's printing money, but really all the banks are printing money too, and they're doing that by creating loans. So for instance, they have reserves, which is your savings in the bank, or some other reserves that they have, like treasuries or corporate bonds. But when you go get a mortgage, they actually freshly create that money as a ledger in their balance sheet. Now, that wasn't there. They don't necessarily, because we're on a fractional reserve lending banking system, they only have to keep a certain amount of reserves. And I think this might change recently, but really what the crazy thing is for the first $10 million, they have to keep 10% in reserves. And then from $10 million to $50 million, they have to keep 3% in reserves. So for basically the first $50 million of money they create, it's about 2.7% is the reserve in the bank. And that's the Federal Reserve requires banks to do that, to stay solvent, essentially. From that point on, the reserve requirement is actually, I'll let you guess. Do you know what it is?
I couldn't even begin. It's a
Zero.
small fraction.
0%.
Oh, wow.
0%. So
Okay.
from 50 million to infinite,
Now,
there's no reserve requirement.
So the reason why that's toxic, that's a system that isn't working, or, is that something that we can continue to do? And as we're kind of racking up this debt, where does it go? I mean, where do these, as they grow and grow and grow, I mean, infinite growth isn't really possible. At some point, the theory is that it's got to come down.
It's possible theoretically as a number.
Yeah.
Right? You can, especially now that we're going to digital dollars. So then most of the currency is not even actually printed. Right. I think it's around $3 trillion is actually in physical cash, or maybe that's even in savings. And I could be wrong. It could be 30 trillion. But it's a significant fraction of, or it's a really small fraction of the actual money they print. Most of it's digital dollars. It's literally a ledger at the bank, right? Which used to be pen and paper, but now it's just in a computer somewhere. So theoretically, they could just print infinite amounts of dollars.
Right.
You know, there's no limit to how how big of a number you can do.
And why is that bad for us?
Right,
why is that bad for us, I guess?
all the dollars are debt.
Yeah.
And debt's not sustainable.
Right.
And when I said earlier, all the assets and liabilities should even out, they don't actually, because there's interest on top of that. So technically, it's a negative. It's almost like a sucking thing. So they're sucking wealth away from all of us by using these currencies.
Okay.
And really, that's their tool. Their tool that they use is these exchange rates. And what they did recently, obviously the rates have been going down and down and down. And since the global financial crisis, they took them down pretty low. And then really 2018, we started raising rates. Oh, everything's fixed. We started raising rates. Well, shit hit the fan again. And as of February or early March, we're down to 0 to 0.25% at the Fed's fund rate. So essentially, it costs you nothing to borrow money.
Right.
And really, their hope is that people do borrow money because they want to stimulate the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Get money out there and have people buy things, because when someone is buying a good from someone else, it's putting them to work, and thus they need inputs to their goods, and it puts them to work, and that's sort of how the hamster wheel rolls.
So when there's debt, there's more money in the system, right? So if you're the more loans there are, the more
about our national debt.
Mm-hmm.
National debt's at $24 trillion now. I mean,
Whoa.
Every time I look now, it's just it grows even
Wow.
more, and expecting to be at 30 trillion by next year.
How do you even wrap your head around $30 trillion? I mean, to me, my primate brain just can't even. I have no reference of what that is.
So there's a couple different ways. One of the ones that I always liked was, so if you were given $1 million a day, every day since the time of Jesus, you still wouldn't have had $1 trillion.
Wow.
That's just 1 trillion. Right? It's a couple hundreds of billions, essentially, what it comes out to.
Jeez.
But now think about it. What could you do with $1 million every day to spend? You could do so much, good for the world. You could feed a lot of people, right? We have a lot of homeless. We've got a lot of food issues.
Yeah.
And we're about $24 trillion debt.
Right.
It really is, like you said. I think that's why they get away with it too, because
Yeah.
it's fantasy. It's just a made up number.
And who knows where that
You can't
money's
care.
going? We don't know. I mean, there's, all sorts of black
Well, there's a lot more.
budgets and hidden costs that, I mean, taxpayers, we have no idea where the money's going. There's
Yep.
some things that
Well,
are public.
and that's the debt on
Yeah.
the books,
Right, exactly.
right?
Yeah.
This is the on the books
The
debt.
black budgets
So,
is what concerns me.
yeah. Well, then the other thing is that they're never going to pay off the debt. They can't pay off the debt because, as we established earlier, the debt creates the money.
Right.
So we need the debt because that's how the money gets into the system. We're not going to ever pay off the national debt,
Sure.
not under the current monetary system. But it gets even crazier when you look into the banking system and their derivatives. And I started digging into a lot of this stuff in the financial crisis. How they, like I was saying, so the banks print money. Well, they also create these things called derivatives, which is essentially it's a, to make a very complex thing simple. A derivative is something that derives its value from an underlying thing. So a derivative could be insurance on your house, or a derivative could be insurance on bonds, so to speak, which a lot of it is. But these derivative liabilities are in the hundreds of trillions, and I actually have seen some estimates that it's thousands of trillions. So globally in the financial system right now. So for instance, I was just reading a report today, Deutsche Bank, who's in really bad shape. They look like that's could take down the euro system. But they're trying to create that bad bank. It's the largest bank in Germany, basically Deutsche Bank.
Yeah, they've been caught doing a lot of shady things throughout the years as well, from what I remember.
Oh yeah.
Lots of money laundering schemes, and
they're not as bad as HSBC, but Deutsche Bank they had their fingers in every different pie and realized that they didn't know what was going on.
HSBC is the one I was thinking of. Maybe HSBC has been involved in a.
On that for a second, but no, Deutsche Bank. So it comes down to like their net liabilities on their balance sheet right now is about $1.8 billion. But if you dig through the numbers underlying the derivatives that net to 1.8 trillion is actually $36 trillion of derivatives.
What?
So it's like, let's say 16 trillion and 16 trillion on both sides, but they net to only $1.8 billion. But what we found out during the global financial crisis is things don't unwind naturally, especially in a crisis, right? All these books and what happened, why AIG blew up during that whole fiasco with their when Lehman Brothers went bust, is because they had sold all these derivatives. In their case, it was credit default swaps, into the tune of I believe trillions. It was at least maybe it was a $300 billion bailout, I think, and it doesn't net to zero because the problem is you can say, well, he owes me 100 and I owe him 100, so that's zero. But he owes me 100, and if he can't pay me, well, now I can't pay him, right? So, it only nets to zero in a very graceful, functioning economy. But when you build up something so big like that, where the derivatives on the underlying $1.8 billion is like 36,000 times more, it doesn't unwind gracefully. And that's where the issues come into play.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I mean, so the Fed, people talking about, a Fed bubble and sort of what is the Federal Reserve? What's their role in kind of where?
Yeah. So really the role is to goose the economy. It looks like at this point, and I think they're going to be buying stocks here soon. They've essentially now said that they're going to buy everything down to even junk bonds. That was announced here in March to sort of bail out everybody. Also, the ECB, which is the European Central Bank, just today announced that they are going to be buying junk bonds as well. And that's important. And the reason they did that today is because all the debt is being downgraded, and specifically Italy. And so what it looks like is that on Friday, Italy will be downgraded to junk status. And at that point, in all of their charters, basically all these, when you deal on these numbers and these things, and this is why I like really geek out about it, and most people's eyes just glaze over, is because these are the sovereign wealth funds. These are the Illinois teacher pension funds.
Right.
These are the PIMCOs and the very big
police
funds and the hedge
officers
funds.
and
Exactly.
all those.
And so they're the ones that they're the billionaires. They're the ones making decisions. They're the ones, funding people. They're the ones greenlighting projects. They're really who you have to go to do anything in this world right now to get funding. You can save on your own and you can get it, but in a debt-based society, if someone takes your idea, they can just go take out a loan for $100 million, and now all of a sudden they can buy the factory, they can get all the employees, and they can just take your idea and run with it.
Yep.
Whereas if you just tried to with your own blood, sweat, and tears, and you maybe borrowed someone that actually had savings, and you can only do it on a small scale, again, because we're in a debt-based system.
Right.
So really, debt is the name for corporations to scale up. But yeah, so when you talk at that level, that's why they're all needing bailouts. But really, to sort of go back into this system, what we're seeing right now with the ECB and the Fed and everyone buying all these bonds is because they have to, because everyone's a net seller, because everyone's trying to raise cash right now, and because the global economy is shut down.
Yeah.
And everyone needs to pay off their debts. And sure, on the individual scale, the governments are saying, we'll let you not pay your mortgage for a bit, or maybe you don't have to pay your credit card for a bit. And there's possibly going to be some forgiveness at the local consumer level. But really, when you're talking about major corporations and you're talking about governments, then it's really tough to say, yeah, that $1 billion bond payment you have to do next week, let's just punt that to next year or something. So there's been a massive scramble for cash. That in all the markets tanked, right? So people are trying to sell stocks, and they have to raise cash because they're all on margins too. So they're all, everyone's borrowing, right? So they don't actually own what they say they own. All of their assets are sort of fake and fraudulent. And at the end of the day, what everyone needed to pay off their debts quickly, because all the margin accounts and all the loans were being recalled, was dollars. And what we were talking about before, there's only $3 trillion of dollars in circulation, but there was about $90 trillion of dollars that were recalled during this crisis in March. And
Right.
So at that point, $90 trillion is scrambling to secure that $3 trillion, right? So it doesn't happen. And that's why the US dollar is going up higher, and all the global currencies are going down, because they're tanking their currencies to honestly, we've been in a currency war for a bit, but right now in this current crisis, the dollar is popping because there's a mad scramble for dollars to pay off their debts, because all the debts, even in Europe, in Asia, and China, all their debts are dollar denominated, which is interesting. So they're not denominated in yen, they're not denominated in yuan, or euros or Swiss franc. Now, some of them are, but there's a lot of debts that are denominated in dollars, and they can't print them.
So
it's really hairy.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're kind of getting into our current situation, and
Sure.
with the COVID-19 shutdowns, the CARES Act, and just some things that aren't exactly super clear to me, that are some red flags, especially some of these large corporations getting extreme amounts of money, but then small businesses are really struggling to get that money to keep their employees on payroll. And restaurants and medium-sized small businesses, our buddy that's a brewery owner, and just obviously the government, I've known for a while now that you really can't rely on them when you're in a bad situation, whether it be a hurricane or some sort of crisis. And so for me, it's obviously probably it was written probably before all of this happened. I mean, it's over 1,000 pages, correct? So it feels like they, for me, it had this ready to go.
In January.
Yeah. Okay. So
it's 335 pages. A lot of it obviously was piecemeal and written before, as they always do. There's a lot of these that are sort of waiting for crises. there's a couple of them, parts like the healthcare stuff was already, in the works. There's a lot of different stuff that they cobble together. But what is the phrase? Never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yep.
So there's, the politicians, that's their job, and lobbyists, that's their job, is to have these ready and waiting for the right moment. Stuff that's unpalatable in normal times, all of a sudden can get rammed through very quickly.
So what's in there? What are they trying to ram through?
Well, so what was interesting too is they did sort of the same thing as during the financial crisis with the TARP, the Toxic Asset Relief Program, where it didn't pass right away, and the stock market tanked. And I don't know if you remember that. I distinctly remember it went down like 800 points, which now looks like small chump change compared to what we've been swinging this past month. But back in 2008, that was massive. But they didn't pass it right away, and the stock market tanked and threw a tantrum, and then they ended up passing it. I don't remember if it was the next week or 3 days later. Similarly here, what was interesting to me is when I looked into the CARES Act, it was actually proposed in January. So they knew in January that a lot of this stuff was coming down the pipe, and really, I'd say the public was mostly quiet. A large majority of the public was really unaware until mid-February. We were talking about it. And obviously, I remember during the Super Bowl, I was mentioning it to people like this is coming down the pipe. That I was hyper aware in January actually that this coronavirus was a big thing. I remember seeing the videos of Wuhan getting shut down. I mean, I don't know if you saw any of those. They took massive boulders and literally like sealed the city up. And I was like, whoa,
it was wild.
Something's going on.
Yeah, that's wild.
They were welding people in buildings, which is insane. We're not doing that here yet. But yes, so this bill's, they're all Frankensteins, right? Frankenstein's monsters, so to speak. They're hobbled together from all these places left and right, and they're a wish list of people. Famously the $20 million that Kennedy Center got that they put into this. And again, I love how people say it's a $2 trillion stimulus bill or whatever, relief bill, this CARES Act. Right. And it was 2.2 trillion. That 0.2, whatever, it's just $200 billion, whatever.
Right.
So a part of this, there's surveillance systems in it, which obviously we know they've been in the works, but there are a lot of healthcare surveillance systems, which I've been finding really interesting is that, sure, those can be used for good, but they can be used for a lot of other things besides healthcare. The $500 million was for a nation was for a nationwide health surveillance system, and 450 billion of it, around that much, was actually the Treasury ponying up money for the Fed. So 450 billion of it goes to the Fed to create a new lending facility that is the reserve. And again, how we talked about reserves earlier. Now the Fed of this 450 billion, again, which is of the 2.2 trillion. Now the Fed of that 450 billion can do their ratio and create about another $4 trillion on top of it. So what most people don't realize is that we call it 2.2 trillion, but it will, at the end of the day, depending on how the Fed doles out that money, it'll probably be about $6 trillion. Mm-hmm. And then, like you mentioned, the 350 billion was for the small business loans for small business companies. Mm-hmm. And so that 350 billion, that facility was opened on Friday, and by Wednesday, sold out.
Yeah.
By Wednesday.
Yeah. All that money just gone. There wasn't nearly enough people that got a chance to even take a whiff at that money, which, is and so go into that a little bit, because I thought that was interesting.
So I thought about looking into it, and what I found initially, and I think they're starting to change some of this now, but and we don't need the business now. It's just me and my two partners, so mm-hmm. We don't have too big of a payroll, and we're doing decently well. And actually, I'm keeping my current contract, which is great. So we didn't have to shut down since we're remote workers. We're blessed in that regard.
Right.
But a lot of the 350 billion went to considerably large corporations. I know Shake Shack got
I saw that.
black-eyed by this. They got $10 billion. I think they're giving it back.
Yeah.
And then Harvard, which they have a $45 billion endowment fund. So, letter of the law, they qualified as small businesses, but it rubbed people the wrong way big time. And obviously they have the lobbyists to be able to get there in line. The other thing was that in order to qualify, and at least in this initial portion, I think they're starting to change some of this, but you had to have a pre-existing loan with your bank.
Right.
So a lot of it was through the banks, so the Treasury is giving the money directly to the banks essentially. You had to already have a pre-existing loan from February 14th or before. So it's the only companies that are eligible are companies that already had been taking out debt.
Yep.
And so my company actually wasn't even eligible for that first round, at least. And like I said, I think they're changing some of this, but initially it was that you had to already have essentially your loan established with your bank in order to be eligible for it turns into a grant. It's a loan essentially, but if you use it for payroll,
yep.
I think there's a couple of things: payroll and rent, and I think something else. It essentially is forgiven, so it's technically a grant. But yeah, there's, and I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff that's in this act that we don't even know about yet. Because again, you're right. It was bill 335 pages. That's
okay. Am I thinking of the Patriot Act that was over 1,000, or am I thinking of something different? I heard some big numbers
Patriot
for
was pretty long to the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act.
Okay,
was like 2,000 pages.
I was mixing those up.
And that had a lot of surveillance stuff too. That established a lot of the health records. So where they can take and federally get your health records. There was a lot of other weird things in the ACA regarding just even 1099 employees and 1099 forms of, what is a contract, and that brought the limits down to I think $600, which you couldn't even buy a gold coin at the point without having to fill out some forms and certain issues. Patriot Act was similar. So just like the CARES Act, obviously it had been in the works, right? So I always find it cracks me up. It's actually the USA Patriot Act.
Mm-hmm.
And it stands for Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001. So it's USA Patriot Act. I always find that they're just so creative.
I love the names. Yeah, the names are just great. Because
right?
hey, don't worry. There's nothing to see here. We're keeping you safe. Just hand over some of your freedoms and liberties. You're going to be nice and safe.
Right.
Don't worry. You're a good Patriot Act. If you're not a patriot,
I think
you don't believe in this
military
act.
funding bills came after that, which is the indefinite detention, so they can indefinitely detain.
That's NDA Section 1032 or Section 1035. Yeah,
they were like grants of roving surveillance authority under the FISA. So they created those FISA courts, which obviously we're finding out now during this whole Trump impeachment that like the data that the FBI is providing for their FISA warrants was all bogus, and they knew it was bogus.
Yeah.
Regardless of political spectrum on that side, like that is scary.
Mm-hmm.
That the FISA court are just rubber stamping these warrants, and and I believe some of the FISA judges knew that the data was just totally bogus. But regardless, the FBI is just flat out lying to them and getting the warrant. So they're getting whatever they want.
And the FISA courts are really just a legal way for them to spy on people, to do wiretaps.
Yes.
And essentially, it's supposed to be used for foreign intelligence agents, for foreign entities, correct? I mean, that's why it was created. And then
theoretically... but obviously that is, one, our communication is so digital now that this Skype call might be going through Canada.
Yeah.
Right? Who knows? And at that point, now this is a foreign call.
Right.
And falls under that. Even though we're between two U.S. citizens in America, you don't necessarily know. Or if I was using a VPN, I could send my traffic elsewhere.
Yeah.
So you don't know. And the other thing is you don't necessarily know that your call
That's interesting. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah. So it also permits the seizure of voicemail messages under a warrant. It just added a bunch of different stuff. made it lawful to intercept a wire or electronic communication of a computer trespasser in certain circumstances. And there's just a bunch of money laundering stuff in that. But the interesting thing is, like you're saying, that law. So first of all, it was proposed and passed in 3 days.
Interesting.
3 days.
You think that would be something you'd want to chew on?
Yeah. So that's the full debate on the bill. That's everything about it. It was unanimous. We were going to go get those terrorists, and we're going to give all our freedoms just to get those terrorists.
Right.
But obviously, like you said, that it wasn't written in those 3 days. They already had it waiting in the wings.
Right.
And again, whatever your take on 9/11 is, they did let no crisis go to waste in that case too. And so that actually, there's a lot of stuff that goes back to the Omnibus Counterterrorism Act of '95 that was after the, I believe that was Oklahoma City bombing. But so Patriot Act really goes back to that bill, and who proposed that bill? Senator Joe Biden.
Right.
And who supported it on the House side? Representative Chuck Schumer. So these same actors are they're embedded in there, and there's no way Joe Biden wrote it. Someone gave it to him, right?
Exactly.
But they knew that he wasn't going to bat an eye, and he's going to put that bill in there and keep it waiting in the wings for the right moment.
Wow. And so you have the Patriot Act that was, George W. Bush. And then Obama pushed through in 2012 the NDAA Section 1021? Or
National Defense Authorization Act.
Yeah, so that one.
And that might be where the indefinite detention comes.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was kind of trying to segue into, some of the surveillance technology and some of these things that are happening in China and Singapore, and sort of the narrative that, hey, look how well Singapore is doing. They put in all these surveillance technologies and they don't have many cases of COVID-19. Their deaths are low. They're using drone technologies and that are outfitted with thermometers. I don't know how much of those reports, how accurate those are.
A lot of those thermometers even now report directly in.
Yeah. So
you can see like a global map of everything.
Right. So NDAA Section 1021 and
the
Section...
NDAA,
Sorry.
It's a military funding bill too. So you couldn't vote against it because otherwise you were anti-military and, you didn't want to support the troops.
Yeah. Right. But that was pretty much, they could pick up a U.S. citizen without providing, essentially, you didn't have the right to get a lawyer, correct? Some of that stuff was in there. I think it was
foreign people.
Okay.
But yeah, essentially they held them in Gitmo without trial, and they basically you would get essentially a military tribunal, I believe, but there was no set date, and it could be, I might be mistaken, there could be U.S. citizens possible if they were involved in foreign terrorism somehow.
Right.
So you might be right.
Well, because I think that's how they went after one of the guys from Al Qaeda that was actually a U.S. citizen, the blind sheik.
Yeah, I remember.
And so I think they utilized that to be able to go after, because he was a U.S. citizen. He wasn't killed in the U.S. Yep. And so, this executive order kind of allowed that. So, when these big executive orders get pushed through, spidey senses kind of go up a little bit. Everyone's in fear. Everyone's concerned about COVID-19 and the spread of this disease.
Big driver.
So, there's so many people saying a lot of crazy things. Some, who knows what really happened with how this virus was released. Whether it was a bat through these wet markets or whether it was accidentally released from a laboratory. The doctor,
and that doesn't matter. We might never know.
That's not the point. The fact is that what's being done after the after the situation and how things are changing from this event. You know, we were talking about it a little bit earlier. At this point, it doesn't really matter where it came from. It's what are they going to do in regards to changing our way of life moving forward, and how we have to be pretty responsible in educating ourselves on a lot of these things that we're talking about here. And so we can go into some of this surveillance things, which kind of freaked me out a little bit. You were talking about the other day, I guess the surveillance things that are in the CARES Act that make you a little bit nervous.
Healthcare bent.
Okay.
You know, and they have a lot of other pieces in place too, but and that's what I find interesting is that, you know, I believe Fauci and I believe Dr. Birx are genuine in their desire to have, well, and whatever the guy that runs the CDC, he's an interesting character too. I can't think of his name, but the big jovial guy. You know, I think they do actually want this data to maybe combat disease, and they feel like, you know, if we had this data and we had these real-time monitors and we had all these systems in place, then we could see the disease spread and we could get there and we can action right away and we could save lives and blah, blah, blah. And sure, and that's the thing about all this technology and all this, really the surveillance technology is, what are we doing right now? I'm in North Carolina, you're in Ohio, and we're web chatting over the internet with our, you know, 1080p, you know, cameras and microphones, and so it's used for many different things, used for good. And sure, you could maybe save a nursing home or two or something if, you know, we had those, what are they talking about? I forget what they call them, but like basically a health surveillance monitor system or something. It was funny, they were when they said they're going to put them in place, they said they're going to put them in place for the elderly, the poor, the minorities, and Native Americans.
Oh my God. Yeah, let's just suppress the Native American population just a little bit more.
Right.
They haven't gotten enough shit. Let's just pour it on.
They have
Why
issues,
not?
Right?
Dude, come on.
Yeah, you know that. I don't know, but I found that very interesting. That was on Dr. Birx's like PowerPoint presentation too, like those 4 categories, and I'm like, that's ridiculous, right? Like, and she might really believe that she's trying to save them, but the thing is that you use it for that, it doesn't go away, and what do you use it for in the future?
Well, that's the thing is, are you going to be able to get back these liberties, these civil liberties, these, you know, when you set up a surveillance grid, you have to give over your privacy. You just, I mean, that's a part of the deal. So once it's taken, how do you get it back?
They'll never give the power back.
Okay, so
they never will give the power back without a fight.
That's the danger. That's the danger then, is, hey, this is only for the time being. Well, okay, we hand it over, and the COVID-19, the virus goes away. The surveillance doesn't go away. You know, those systems are now in place. They're implemented into all of our fabric of society at that point. And how do you remove that?
You say it's for healthcare, but it can be used for so many other things. It's exactly the same thing in the Patriot Act, that we're using it for terrorism, and it's only metadata that we're collecting from all these cell phones. But it's been proven time and time again that even though the metadata is anonymous...
Oh, Snowden blew that wide open. Snowden blew that wide open, that it wasn't just metadata.
Yeah.
Because that's what they oh, don't worry, it's just metadata. And then Snowden's like,
It is, but you can tie it to other database and other data and build a bigger picture.
Sure.
And then you can de-anonymize the anonymous data, essentially.
Right.
And that's happening all over the place. So it's not just the governments, it's the private companies. Like, you know, so China is the model in a lot of respects, but with Facebook and the whole Cambridge Analytics or whatever the company is called, where they basically, you know, they were using those online polls and online games that everyone does to, you know, what color shirt are you, or what, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then they get your data. And also, like, anyone that does any of those Facebook quizzes, like, they essentially, in the terms, you're just agreeing to give them all your friends, all your connections, all your networks in that regard. and all the data essentially. But China is the model, and the thing is about China, and like we were talking about earlier, so they were, during this coronavirus, they literally welded people into apartment buildings.
Oh my God.
Like, they welded the doors shut. You could not leave the building physically. And so that's how Orwellian they are in certain regards. But they, like, if you see what they're showing you and the social credit score system that they're doing now, so they're tracking everything. They got cameras everywhere. They were tracking people's heat, right? So just with the cameras doing the infrared heat scanning, as well as anyone that's, they're filtering through. You can't get on the trains. You can't go. And even before the coronavirus, this social credit score that they're doing, like, if basically, if you talk bad about the government, if you are in debt, if you're not paying your bills, if you're in certain regards, maybe you slept in, maybe you were lazy for a month, maybe who knows what people's responsibilities are. Or think about like artists and stuff like that. Some of their lifestyles. Like, I'm sure, I would say not Picasso, but the guy do the melting clocks. I'm sure his lifestyle, wouldn't have scored high on China's social credit score ranking system as a good citizen.
Salvador Dali.
There's some Dali, thank you.
Salvador
There's
Dali.
just some beautiful artwork that's priceless that comes out of that.
Yeah.
So how
he's gonna have a pretty low. Salvador Dali's gonna have a pretty low social credit score. A dude like that isn't going to be doing well in that system.
He's doing drugs. He's lazy. He's not going to work. He's not paying his bills. He's just he's defacing buildings, big murals on buildings.
It's just a whole nother system of control in a way.
Well, right, and it's not necessarily for the best. Like, who could argue that if we suppress Dali, the world would be in a better place? I would hate to be the person that tries to argue that. I mean, I'm sure there are people that think that, but I personally don't. I think, he's added, beauty to my life.
Yeah.
But the thing about the Chinese thing is that it's the U.S. tech companies that are building this tech for them.
Right.
So, sure, it's some of the Chinese companies too, but a lot of it is coming out of the U.S. tech companies. So
Google's been over there,
Facebook, Apple, and a lot of it's coming out of technology that they're stealing from the tech companies. Mm-hmm. And how are they stealing it? Well, they're the ones producing all of these tech goods. So when Apple comes up with a new design, they give the blueprints right to China. Say, here you go, build these. And so they quickly were able to ramp up on a lot of that. But there's a lot of surveillance. I mean, there's underneath the scenes, and there's a much wider scope than this, but there's just constant cyber warfare going on too, and they're trying to steal data. I remember actually during the 2000 election, the whole Bush Gore thing, everyone focuses on Florida and the hanging chads.
Yeah.
But Ohio had just as big of an issue.
Yeah.
That really wasn't talked about on a national scale. It went to our Supreme Court. So the exit polling data in the Ohio election in 2000 in the Bush Gore was so drastically off. And people saw similar things in the last election with the Trump and Hillary too. Not saying that the polling data was always accurate either too, so we don't know. But it went to the Supreme Court of the state of Ohio. And in that, the guy testified that he was paid. He was a contractor for a company in Florida that produced the voting machines in some districts of Ohio. And he testified under oath at the Ohio Supreme Court that he was instructed to and wrote a program that would flip the vote 51-49 for whatever way you want it to go.
Right.
And that was in the voting machine. And that's the other thing about the voting machines and all the surveillance or whatnot. Why isn't it open source? Why can't we see what the code is? Why is it proprietary?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he said that real quick. So he said the reason that they're like, so he was a whistleblower basically. Well, why didn't they do anything with it? And he was like, well, there's bigger fish to fry because his boss was a Chinese national and stole like 20 gigs of NASA data and was sending that back to China. So they're like, we don't care about this 51-49 vote flip program. We're more concerned about this Chinese national that just took all of NASA's data here.
Wow.
Right?
That's nuts. I mean, that just broke my brain.
I found it last year, but we'll have to go dig that up and put links for people because, I mean, that's still, the videos, surprisingly, you can still find that.
What was
his
it called?
testimony.
What was the video called? If somebody wants to Google it, or in YouTube, right?
I'll look it up. It was. I remember it was hard to find, but basically the Ohio Supreme Court, the 2000 election,
Okay.
um, testimony, the whistleblower testimony.
Yeah. Man.
But yeah, the U.S. tech companies are the ones that are building this tech for China, and it's just going to be turned around and used here because again, they're for-profit companies. They're going to have to sell it once they build all this tech. They're going to want to sell it to someone.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear people, Alex Jones has been screaming this for like 20 years. China's the model. China's the model. And the closer we get to, we get settled into this situation. Right now, you're hearing a lot of people, pretty grounded individuals, that are saying the same thing. China's kind of the model for this surveillance system. And
they were able to lock down.
Yeah, and you have people like Eric Schmidt and, some of these think tanks that are basically saying that if we don't adopt these, that we're going to be left behind in a lot of ways. They can control so many facets of their society, and if we don't adopt that we're just going to get left in the dust and we're not going to be able to compete. So that was a little bit scary. I think there was a Freedom of Information Act request that came out like not too long ago, 5-6 days ago. And we'll have to double check what that think tank was called, but I believe it was a committee on artificial intelligence, and Eric Schmidt, and you had some guys from Microsoft and all the big tech giants.
He's the former CEO of Google, right?
Yeah, exactly. Eric Schmidt from Google. And it's just, it's interesting times, especially for so many years we've heard, keep your eye on China. And right now, all that is really resonating from, many conversations that we've had over the years that you've always said, really watch China's economically on so many different levels. And, it's, and the fact that this virus started in China, some of the Indian researchers that you were telling me about, which I hadn't heard about this, some Indian researchers that had found some of their data that was pretty strange. You want to go into that a little bit?
So what they did is that when they were breaking down the DNA of this virus, essentially, or it's not really DNA, it's not really a living organism, it's a machine, essentially, the RNA, I think, the code, they were comparing it against, and coronavirus is this is not the first coronavirus. I think a lot of people, it's the first time they've heard
SARS
the term.
is a coronavirus.
But, there's a lot of different variations, and it comes from the term crown, because the receptacles on the top look like crowns, essentially. But when they did a study of the genetic code that sort of makes these things up, there was a lot of similarities with, I believe it was SARS. It might have been MERS, but I think it was SARS. But then there was a whole nother section of the code that basically looked like it came from the payload mechanism of HIV. So that transmission mechanism that makes HIV so dangerous and so brutal, because it can quickly bind to human cells, in this case specifically lung cells, which makes it essentially airborne. And in their analysis, it was two Indian scientists. And I will say, so they kind of came up with a study, and no one wanted to do a peer review right away. And the Indian government quickly shut it down. And this was, I think, January too, when I was reading these reports. Okay. Which is interesting because it really hadn't come into the zeitgeist of this country yet, or really globally. Yeah. People sort of didn't care about it, and everyone was sort of fine at that point with suppressing all this information, right? Yeah. Yeah. But when they did the analysis, they didn't find any other coronavirus strains that had both the characteristics of the deadliness of SARS, but the payload mechanism of HIV. And, according to their analysis, the odds of it occurring naturally were slim to none, right? Lightning striking 1,000,000 times.
So and the bat and the wet markets, and the wet markets You know,
Well, and again, it could
who
have come
knows?
from a bad market, but
Sure.
so interestingly, that like a wet market, but that wet market happens to also be down the road. Now, I mean, when I say down the road, it's miles, maybe like 20 miles or so, but in the same city of this Wuhan biological chemical lab, which is a 4-star level 4 chemical lab, which is the highest rating. They're doing chemical warfare, biological weapon research.
Sure.
And actively, so,
Who funds
and this is
that?
what got Zero
Who funds
Hedge
these?
booted off Twitter,
Okay.
is they reported on this.
Right.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So
Go
they
ahead.
reported on this. The doctor that was the head of this one division in this lab, his whole research was on bat coronavirus, human to bat, or bat to human coronavirus transmission. Like, that's what he's been studying for 10 years.
Wow.
And in Wuhan, and that is his own lab. And they were hiring people, and they still had the open jobs posted on their website, like in January. This has all been scrubbed since then. But all this information and like these open positions for coronavirus research doctors that they're looking for. And they did a lot of work with, I know people in the in Duke, basically the Duke Medical Research. I think it might be Duke in Singapore. Technically, it's out of North Carolina, the North Carolina Duke University, but they have research labs all across the world. But and funnily enough, when you dig even further, so you know how Facebook is censoring a lot of coronavirus stuff, and they're fact checking, and anyone that's false information, they're just scrubbing it from the internet.
YouTube too.
Well, sure, YouTube now too. Okay, yeah, I didn't realize that. I'm sure, yeah. But they're like, I don't know if YouTube's scrubbing it or if they're just like,
not scrubbing it, but they're and then they're also putting Wikipedia links and.
Facebook's just outright removing it.
Yeah. Wow.
But so Facebook, one of Facebook's fact checkers is this lady who works for Duke Medical that worked at the Wuhan biolab facility. No joke. So Facebook's fact checker for virus information worked at this Wuhan biochemical lab.
Okay. Wow.
Right?
And this has all been confirmed.
Is that a coincidence?
Right? I mean, this is all fairly confirmed. You know, there's people that put your tinfoil hat on. This is, you know, conspiracy theory. A lot of this stuff, if you don't really have to dig too far to see a lot of red flags. And
the red flags to me are that they're removing it quickly. You know, if it's false information and if it's bogus and if it's not, like, no government cares. Like, there's just crap on the internet all the time that is false. They don't fight it. Well, why would they put all their weight into removing this and discrediting these scientists and squashing any of that early research into any of this? And now it's on Fox News, and Trump's talking about this lab this past week about we're sending the intelligence officials in there, and we wanted to get in there and audit this lab. So now all of a sudden, you know, it's taboo. We can't talk about it. We're scrubbing it, and you guys are all kooks. And now the White House is investigating this lab. And today, this won't get much play in America, but the Chinese are doing the same thing too. And so one of their spokesperson, there's a Chinese spokesperson, but like a news anchor in Arabic, which I find interesting, was talking today that this was actually spread by the U.S. out of Fort Detrick.
Yeah.
And Fort Detrick, our big bioweapons lab. And so a Chinese news anchor today in an Arabic show basically said that the coronavirus, this COVID-19, came from the United States military out of Fort Detrick, and that last year, sometime around April, and now this is the true part, they shut it down for like a month or so, or I don't know how long they shut it down, but they basically had some unsafe practices and felt like some of the stuff was leaking from Fort Detrick, and last April shut it down. So that part's true, but regardless, a Chinese like news personality in Arabic just today is just spreading that the U.S. government's actually the one responsible for spreading the coronavirus, and said that we created it. That was man-made.
Unbelievable.
right? So who do you believe, and where are the facts? That's what's so crazy about all this.
Yeah, and you're just not going to get that on CNN or MSNBC or even, I don't know if Fox News is reporting any of these
What you'll
things.
get on CNN is my buddy sent a link today. Like, it sort of just, it made me mad. But the new fear, like, is that actually the coronavirus causes strokes, and this is the CNN, scathing report, basically not scathing, that's the word, but basically fear mongering report.
Yeah.
That the stroke cases in this hospital in New York went from averaging 2 a month to 5.
Wow.
This is the facts that CNN's reporting if you dig into the article, but it doesn't matter. The headline is coronavirus causes strokes, because now they went from 2 strokes at this hospital to 5. Maybe it's because, like, the people were waiting in February and didn't want to go to the hospital till it became a crisis. Or maybe it's because they're all sitting around eating junk food because they're locked in their house, and go figure and whatnot. But then we get into the bad data too, how all the deaths right now are being reported as corona deaths. Even if you just have any antibodies or any whatever, even if you died of a brain aneurysm, that's a corona death.
Yeah.
Like, this is all,
I heard someone came out and said, yeah, my mother or father, whoever it was, passed away. And basically the hospital was forcing them the cause of death as coronavirus. And apparently it was was in the obituary, and they just swear up and down that it was, it was definitely not the coronavirus, but some other issue that they've had. So you've been hearing some of those.
They might have had the antibodies in their body. I mean, regardless.
Sure. Because they test positive for it, then boom, all of a sudden you die and you test positive for it. You died of coronavirus. I don't know, man. Yeah. Like I said, I'm not an expert in any way, shape, or form and I'm trying to just really keep my mind open. Same
here.
I just tell people, don't watch the news for sure. Don't watch CNN. I mean, you can get a lot of anxiety. I mean, people dealing with, mental issues and anxiety and depression, right now during this time, one of the first things you can do is just stop watching that. And it feels like straight fear mongering at times. Now they're talking about a second wave coming. It's like, oh boy, the second wave. And it's they're just running out of things to get you freaked out about. So, we're going to start worrying about a future coronavirus pandemic now that things are kind of settling down. In a lot of places in America, it seems like we're definitely kind of on the downturn. But I would love to know the real numbers in all the countries, not just ours.
I don't know if they're being told that, because there could be a lot of factors, and I like to keep my mind open about that too. I don't necessarily think it's the government trying to gain these numbers and get the death count higher, because they said maybe 2 million Americans are going to die.
1 million to 2 million 3 weeks ago is what the woman here in Ohio, Amy.
Could be a lot of there could be a lot of factors, like maybe it's an insurance thing. Maybe the hospitals need to do it as a corona death because of insurance purposes, or who knows why exactly they're instructing them. And it's not coming necessarily from the doctors. The doctors are being told this. It's coming from really the bureaucrats that, again, the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, put in place at these hospitals. That what I'm seeing now is a lot of awakening and eye-opening from the doctors, and doctors are speaking out. These healthcare professionals.
What are they all saying? What have you heard from some doctors? Because I've heard a couple things. I want to hear what you've heard.
Sure. Well, obviously of these death certificates, and you and I, we know a couple of nurses, a couple of doctors.
Yep.
My sister-in-law is a doctor in her ER as well. And I'm just hearing random stuff left and right. But a friend of our friend, actually a mutual friend of mine, so she got so mad about the death certificates that she took off and she works in a state up north, and they went to Florida, and she just was like, I'm not doing this anymore, and left because she was so mad about the death certificates. But the other interesting thing is a lot of the doctors are talking out about the bureaucracy of the hospitals now, because there's these managers essentially that the Affordable Care Act have put in place a lot of the hospitals are more conglomerates now,
Mm-hmm.
and that goes into just the funding, the way hospitals get funded, because it's, they are not getting paid right away. They're doing work on people that might never pay. Real quick before on the death certificates. So the other interesting thing in New York's rescinded this now, but they put out, New York City, this is a do not resuscitate order.
Wow.
And that quickly shit hit the fan on that one, and people were like, wait, what do you mean?
Why
and so
would they do that?
No one they put an order. They said anyone who doesn't have a pulse, do not resuscitate them, and mandated that just yesterday or the day before, and they've since rescinded that order. But that's this kind of stuff that we're going to start seeing, I fear. But so the doctors and nurses are talking out against this bureaucracy in the hospitals, and how these the managers and the CEOs and the administration aren't doctors, but they're telling the doctors what to do and what procedures they can do and certain costs and
pencil pushers.
Pencil pushers too, is all the paperwork out of government too.
Right. It's just a giant bureaucracy.
They've been being fed up for so long, and now that all the pressure's on them, and the other thing is, so my sister-in-law, she got they got their pay cut. I don't know how much they got cut, but I mean, it sounded like it was decently significant, and their hours increased. So now all these medical staff are being asked to work longer hours for less pay, which is crazy. I'm sure that there's going to be a breaking point for sure.
Yeah.
But you're already starting to see a lot of them talk out where, sadly, I think I had wished people would have talked out before a crisis. But, people are comfortable. A lot of people don't know that everyone shares the same opinion, or not everyone shares the same opinion, but a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people are having the same issues, hospital to hospital to hospital. And now it's all bubbling to the surface, where they're talking about these bureaucracies at the top, these non-medical people that are dictating surgery. They're coming in surgeries and telling them, certain things they can and cannot do in regards to having to help save their patient, or, we can't afford this procedure, so you can't do that, when the medical professionals, like, this is what's going to save this patient.
Right.
And who cares about that? Who cares about the cost, or who cares about this government regulation here?
And these are the people that we need to be listening to. The doctors, the nurses, if they're being stifled and their message isn't getting out there, that's a shame. I mean, they're the ones on the front lines, so to speak, of the people we should be getting reporting from. We should be listening to, but it feels like a lot of that's not making it into the news. So, whether they're coming out through local news or, exactly. So, God, I would love to get a doctor, a nurse on here, and I would love to hear from somebody, here in Columbus, a doctor, a nurse, and get their perspective. We have a mutual friends that are a husband and wife that are both nurses, and to be honest, they haven't been working much. I know.
I think they're on every week or something.
Yeah. So my buddy had a whole week off.
He's a heart specialist, right?
We're
talking about like people having less heart issues now, or where did all these patients
They're just not scheduling procedures. So they work in the James Cancer Hospital and the Ross Heart Hospital, and so in the cancer hospital, I know there's just nobody coming in for procedures, for cancer treatments. So I guess what they were trying to do was clear up all that space and room for COVID patients when this, giant pandemic was going to just sweep the entire city. And when it really didn't happen, which you could say, hey, maybe it's because we did shelter in place and it worked. Who knows? That could be the case. It very well could be the case. Ohio got ahead of it early. Our cases seem to be, low in comparison to our population. But, a lot of the Ohio State nurses and these cancer hospitals, they just don't have anything to do. They're just kind of sitting around. So, I know the last couple of weeks, they've been just kind of like, hey, just take a week off. And there's just not much going on. And so kind of waiting for this big spike, we keep waiting for this big spike where like every single hospital in the entire city is going to be completely full. We're going to run out of beds. We're going to run out of ventilators. And, you know, when that didn't happen, now there's no procedures scheduled. You know, so there's...
And the hospitals aren't getting in
Mm-hmm.
from it either.
Yeah. So, yeah, man, I would love to get a doctor that's been dealing closely with the situation from
I'd
Columbus.
love to know more too.
That'd be
It's
amazing.
not making that Associated Press talking points.
No.
Or, you know, any of the...
No, you just don't hear it's coming from a lot of independent sources. Some of these stories that are coming out, it's on social media and stuff. You know,
that's a
Facebook.
topic for another day, but yeah,
Mhm.
investigative journalism is going independent, and any of the mainstream, it's just junk.
Yeah.
It's just junk.
So what are the positives, Bryce? What are some things that you're seeing? I know
You were starting to hit on that earlier,
Yeah.
and so that's the interesting thing. I think that, to me, that is a positive, that these doctors are starting to talk out. You know, like I said, it's sad that it took a crisis for people to realize that there was this dysfunction and that stuff underneath the hood wasn't working as expected.
Yeah.
But, you know, through these things, you get a lot of change. You get a lot of, you know, honestly, these are cleansing moments. You know, there was a lot of bad stuff. There's a lot of weak stuff, and we're sort of getting rid of all that.
The
other thing is, I think,
it's getting ripped back.
Just globally, not just doctors, people are just waking up to,
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's going around them. One, money situations. You know, sadly, I think it's been a reality check for a lot of people that you know, we're a consumer-driven economy, right? And if you get furloughed or if you lose your job, and you sadly thought that was going to go on forever, and you could afford these houses and these cars and these
boats,
credit card debt,
and
you know, going out every day, going to the bar all the time, taking vacations, and you know, that's not everyone, but that's definitely people in this country. I mean, if you look at the savings trends and the consumer, the credit card trends, it's alarming. You know, what is it, like? It was either 40 or 60%, regardless of what it is. It's a terrible number of U.S. households didn't have $1,000 in savings. So we were already setting ourselves up for failure in that regard. But, you know, I think that is this is a wake-up call for people. And there's going to be a lot of people struggling with things, but, you know, there's so many more people that I've heard planting gardens, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, the kids are out of school, so there's people doing homeschooling now. I know you and your $2, you know, that's an added struggle, but honestly, that might be a good thing. You know, that people have to deal more with their family and their kids and get to more time with their family.
No, that's been great for us.
The homeschool,
we've loved it.
Trend that happens.
Yeah,
I think there's going to be a significant portion.
As long as you can keep them socialized. As long as you can keep kids socialized. That's the only issue with homeschooling.
Right now, anyways, right?
There's nothing. Like, my daughter cries every single day because she can't see her friends. She wants to go to school. I mean, you know,
our neighbors, and we broke quarantine last Sunday, and so that's been interesting to see, is like who will break quarantine and, you know, hush hush, like we can go have dinner with some or something,
right?
And don't, you know, I don't blame people that don't, because, you know, the fear is a real thing.
Yeah.
We broke quarantine with some friends of ours, and their 9-year-old daughter came in and she's like, I am just so socially starved.
Oh my God.
I didn't tell her to say that. That's
great.
All her.
That's great.
And she's like, I just need to see people. And she like looked at her family and she's like, I mean, these are people, but not these people, other people.
My people. I need to see my people.
Yeah. I think the trends are going to be interesting to see coming out of this. I think a lot of people are going to be saving. And, you know, that's not good for the economy. But I think on an individual level, people are going to come out really strong. Like I said, like a lot of gardening's happening, homeschooling. You need a lot more self-reliance.
Yeah, people have time to do things that they never had time to do before. You know, there's so much free time, whether it's planting a garden, you know, somebody picking up a hobby or getting more serious about a hobby or starting a business that they always wanted to start, or you know, some people are kind of digging
Yeah, I
into the
think for you guys
fear.
and doing what you're doing right now, doing what we're doing. I mean, this was, you see the opportunity there. I mean, we'd obviously been talking about it, but this sort of,
Yeah.
got it started. Like, well, what do we do now? And
Yeah.
I think this is just one example of hundreds of thousands of tons of examples of that going on right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other trends are buying local.
Yeah.
Our local farmers cannot produce stuff quick enough. Like the one guy that we get a lot of meat and eggs and chicken from, he has like hogs, he has a bunch of stuff. In his house, he has a farm, but he lives in like more suburbia area. In his garage is just full of chickens right now because he can't grow them quick enough. And
What? Everybody's building chicken
people
coops.
getting locally.
Everybody's building
What's
chicken.
that?
Everybody's building chicken coops. Everybody's
Yeah,
getting a garden.
exactly.
Yeah, that's
We
amazing.
have another, and I'm actually, remind me about that after this call, Mikey, because I need to. I'm on the treasurer of our local HOA, and I'm going to propose that we have a no chicken rule in our HOA laws that no one enforces anyways.
That's got to go.
Tons of my neighbors have chickens, but
yeah, Columbus doesn't have an ordinance for
it's on the
chickens.
books, and I want to get rid of that. But yeah, so that buying local, finding out where your food comes from,
Yeah.
who has it locally. I think just finding alternatives to news sources is, a lot of people have been digging, trying to find the truth, what's going on. And again, we might never know the truth. I don't think we'll ever know the true origin of wherever this came from. And it could have been just totally from, like you said, some guy eating some bat soup somewhere. You know. It doesn't matter.
Well,
but these trends are breaking, and that's a good thing for everybody. As people get out of their daily routines, it makes you stop and think about really what's important.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And
spending time with family has been such a blessing for me. And for our family, it's just, the kids are both home. All my gigs got canceled, and my partner, was on kind of, coming back to his position, but there was a layoff period for a lot of our friends in production, and we're live conferences, festivals, concerts. We're live streaming specialists, and
the live concerts,
and that just all evaporated. Overnight, just boom, gone. So. We really just trying to shift gears and be malleable right now. I think that's important for everybody is not get locked in and too comfortable when things like this happen. And, at the rate we're going, it feels like that there's just so many strange things that happen. I mean, for example, last summer, remember the good old days when Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself? I mean, I really miss those days. Like that; those are the good times.
Was I lied to him?
But, we have good days ahead. But it makes you look back on last summer and be like, oh my God, remember the good old days when everybody just found out that pedo rings were a real thing, and oh boy. But no, this is a lot of positive things that, at least our group of friends, everyone's has had a good attitude and, is getting through it fairly well, which is good to see.
So far.
Yeah, so far.
And that's the thing. I think, what I'd encourage people to do is to stay positive, because we're not through this.
No.
We haven't yet opened the economy. We will see how this goes.
Yeah.
But I always found it interesting that like the hiking trails were getting so congested. Hiking trails were getting congested that they had to shut them down.
Yeah.
So that means people were going outside, which is great.
Yeah.
Picking up all those hobbies, but I think I wrote down a list a while ago, just different things. Like read, plant a garden, learn to shoot, clean your house.
Yeah.
Eat healthy. But I think. Really importantly too, just monitoring local politics too, because that's where the rubber meets the road in your local area.
Exactly.
Trump can't enforce anything that he does, or Obama or Bush or whoever. It comes down to your local, local politicians, your local law enforcement, local firefighters and stuff like that. They're the ones that you're going to end up being interacting with.
Exactly. Yeah, there's so many things on a federal level that aren't really going to affect you. I mean, obviously there's some things that will affect us when it comes to money policy and some of those kind of bigger issues. But really keeping an eye on your local government, you can get so much more done and be involved on that smaller level, and see the difference and change locally. So that's important. It's really cool that you guys are you and your wife are getting involved in local politics there in North Carolina. And I'd love to see where that all leads for you guys. And that's, maybe
it's been a good group for us to be a part of. I mentioned at the top, I'm the chair of the Libertarian Party here, but it's been eye-opening for me to be a part of a third party like that, where everyone is different, especially in this party. And I don't know if it might be the same in the other ones too, the other independents, but I feel like the Republicans and the Democrats are all homogenous. I can tell which ones of my friends are the ultra liberals and which ones are the ultra conservatives, and they're still my friends and they're great people. But in the Libertarian Party, one of my friends, his profile it's great. Is that 4 of the guys in our group standing together, and they're all libertarians and they're all about freedom, and one's a Jew and one's a Christian and one's a Muslim and one's a pagan, and they're all buds and they're all hanging out, and really the driving is freedom. Freedom for you, freedom for me, freedom of choice, and to really treat people like adults and respect everyone's decisions, and that everyone's not going to make the right decision all the time, or the right decision for them might not be the decision that you wanted them to make. But I just personally that jives with me, that giving people the freedom to be themselves make this place a better place.
Yeah, and we need third parties. This is ridiculous. This 2-party system, man. It's like, two heads of the same dragon. It really is. How the debates are controlled, and the RNC and the DNC, and with people made fun of me for voting for Gary Johnson, and it's like, it's not that I necessarily liked Gary Johnson all that much. He got killed for the Aleppo controversy and all that. He didn't know what Aleppo was, and it was like one thing he said, and it just exploded his whole operation. But that's besides the point. For me, it was more or less to vote for a third party, not necessarily because I like Gary Johnson all that much, but just to have that third option and to be able to talk with other people about having a third option. And I'm an independent. I'd say I'm libertarian leaning, moderate. I'm pretty balanced. And political parties, they're just not for me to be a card-carrying Republican or a Democrat. But I think it's important that we have a third party, a fourth party, a fifth party, a sixth party. Let's have as many different political parties as possible, and just this left-right paradigm.
It feels like everyone thinks they fall into either A or B.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're saying
I'm not
360 million people, and you're either A or B?
And then you got to toe that party line. So if you're, mainstream Republican, you got to be pro-life, and you got to be, Christian values. And then on the Democratic side, on the left, there's just so many things. So if you're not necessarily for one thing or the other, then you fit into either this left category or the right category. Well, most people don't fit into strictly into one or the other. It's a mixture of values and views that people have. I mean, we're all so different. Human beings vary so much. How can you put someone into a 2-party system box? It just seems like an old system that just doesn't work. It feels like it's really crumbling, especially when we have Joe Biden running against Donald Trump. Hold on a second.
Right. And again, how controlled was that? Joe Biden was the runner from the get-go. Yeah. Right? They weren't going to let Bernie get that.
They weren't going to let Bernie win, man. And then Bernie comes out and he supports Joe Biden. And, that's the difficult thing that I had. in the 2016 election. It was when Bernie dropped out of that, right away supported and backed Hillary Clinton's campaign. So, yep. He's but there's no choice there. Trump, Biden, it's the illusion of choice. It's like AT&T, Verizon, Walmart, Target. You get the illusion of choice. George Carlin has an amazing joke about that.
It would be totally different.
Yeah.
Regime under either or. It's not they're not the same person, but the long-term trends would stay intact.
Yeah.
So what we've been talking about, monetarily wise, surveillance wise, just taking away your personal freedoms and rights.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Biden would be a slightly different president than Trump.
I just can't wait for the debates. If nothing else, they're going to be absolutely hilarious and entertaining. I mean, I'm definitely not a Trump supporter. I'm not a Trump guy. I'm not a Biden guy.
Presidential year.
Yeah.
We haven't hardly had anything.
There's. Yeah. I don't know how any of this is going to play out. These are weird and wonderful times, Bryce. This was an awesome time sitting down with you and finally doing this conversation. We've had these conversations for years and years and years. They've never once been recorded. Some of them have been super passionate, going back to our kind of mid and late 20s. I think I've calmed down quite a bit and have gotten a bit more grounded from those days. And so, everybody watching and listening, thank you for having an open mind, and hopefully we brought you some good information today. Bryce, you've been awesome. Say hi to your wife, and thanks everybody. This is
thanks to you and Stoner. It's great.
Yeah, man. This is The Strange Road, and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Crowdcast at The Strange Road. Again, take care, everybody. It's been awesome. See you, Bryce. Be good, bud.